Hi, everybody. This week we're on week 5. Week 5 is over the hump into the stretch. We've got 1 week left after this. And this week we have ethics in the correctional system. And in this, we're going to be looking at our discussion is going to be about the two justifications for punishment and treatment, and which you believe is most important, looking at what you've been given. And I'm going to send you the PowerPoints on this, so I hope that will help you. It's also, if you believe retribution, tell us why you think the 3 common preventions, deterrence, incapacitation, and treatment are not as important. And if you believe it's prevention, tell us which of the 3 is most important. And I think that will be kind of a fun week to do this discussion, so I'm looking forward to seeing what you have to say on that. Our paper on this week is 4 to 5 pages. And it's going to be on, you're going to discuss any ethical concerns you have with this way, this facility. You're going to read this entire top part, and you're going to be looking at your book and deciding what is ethically right or what is ethically wrong with this. And there's many of you in this class that are already in corrections, so I think this is really kind of going to be really fun to see what you have to write. But for those of you who plan a career in corrections or correctional counseling, would you have concerns if you were employed at this facility? What do you think about this facility? For all of you that are justifying your judgment by explaining the ethical rules you have applied and the ethical model you've used. And don't forget to address the role of conflict faced by correctional officers. So we're going to talk about some conflicts, and I'm going to show you the PowerPoints that I have for you. This is week 12. This is going to be 12, and we're going to go over some of the stuff that happens with that in conflict. And when we look at conflict, we have to say, where does the conflict come from? Well, there's actually a lot of conflict that you wouldn't even think of, but it's there. The courts change so much. Remember, a correctional officer is very similar to a police officer. They have uniform, they have authority, they have the right ability to take whatever liberties you have away from you. They have the legal authority to use force, and they also have to rely on you at the same time. One of the things is, if you look at like the Hampden County Jail, there are 1 or 2 corrections officers in a pot of 27 people and nobody's armed. So there's a lot of ethical stuff that's going on. When does the gatekeeper become the friend? When does there's some of the ethical things that we've seen in the jails. And the difference between a jail and a prison is the jail will keep you up to 2.5 years of misdemeanor charges, or even 10 felonies in Massachusetts you can keep in the jail. But if you have more than 2.5 years, you go to prison, a state prison, which would be, there's a lot of state prisons in Mass, but you've heard of Walpole, which became Cedar Junction. So there's a lot of, there's a big difference. If you're in a jail, you're a very transient group of people. People are moving in and out every single day. They're changing continually, so you don't build that bond as a correctional officer and an inmate. Whereas if you're in a prison, you're spending much more time with that person and you're knowing more about that person. So we're going to be looking at the correctional officers and how that changed, and it changed in the 70s and 80s. And funny to note on this, DYS, which is a locked up facilities for adjudicated or juveniles that are found adjudicated but guilty of a crime, get put into the Department of Youth Services. In the 80s, what happened, they would go to Westfield State College. We had the largest facility in the state on East Mountain Road in Westfield, and they would get football players. And I know this because the director told me this is what he would do. He'd find the biggest guys he could, and they wore common clothes. So you would not know who the inmates were from who the correctional officers were, and that became a real problem because you don't know who's who. And it became more of like he says, I use it for like an intimidation. He's long gone, by the way, but that changed, and unions became involved, and they wanted to be on the same pay scale as police officers, and they were never there. So with that unionization and with professionalism and the diversity and training, correctional officers became a really viable, great job. It is one of the best jobs, I think, out there. I think we have, our Hampden County Corrections is one of the shining stars in the area. And certainly if you haven't looked into that, you should, because I think they're exceptional. So discretion, they have a full range of discretion, just like police officers have discretion. So do they write that little gig for somebody doing a minor infraction, or do they not? Do they apply physical force or not? There's many, many, many different things of discretion they have. They can charge an inmate with disciplinary infractions, or they can give a verbal reprimand. They can say, don't do that again. Or they can turn a blind eye to it thinking, okay, well, you know what? He never gives me a hard time. I'm just going to pretend I didn't see that. So there's also disciplinary committees that look at these things too, and then they have the discretion. Do we write this as a verbal? I mean, do we write it as, just a person got a warning, or do you just give a verbal warning? And then you have to sit there and look at the treatment professionals. Now, our jails have an awful lot of social workers in them. People are there to help you because the jails really want to see you go in and come out a better person. So they offer an awful lot of services that you can access while you're in there. And there's a lot of people who have done so well coming out of jail because they took that gift of you can have treatment, you can have mental health treatment, you can have education, we can train you in something, and there's many that have. There's many that have done that. So treatment professionals have the discretion and the right to say, I'll give you an example, parole officer. Now, a parole officer has the right ability to go into somebody's house. And when they go into somebody's house, they can look in your canisters and see if you have, a bag of weed, or they can go and say, oh, yeah, find you with a nip and you're supposed to be alcohol free. They have a huge amount of discretion on what they write and what they see. They could be going into your house at any time and see that you have, you're someone in there that shouldn't be there. You have things written into your parole that aren't necessarily illegal, such as, having a nip bottle of some type of alcohol. That's not illegal, but it might be against your parole, what you have set up as your guidelines. So they have great amount of discretion on that. So the new era of corrections also brought with it, California had some rules that came out, and those rules came out that they mandated that you have to have medical care. And that's really a great thing that happened. You have to be able to include, you have to be able to release them if you can't, or put them somewhere to get any medical care. So that actually worked out well. And that helped with mental illness because we have a huge amount of mental illness that's in jail and prisons. So when we talk about, that's going the wrong way. Officers, we talk about the relationships, and we need to cover that because when we sit there and talk about discretions and dilemmas, we have to remember that both parties need to work together to make it a peaceful place to live. If you have unarmed officers in a pod, you're relying on people within that pod to keep you safe as well. And you also have to realize that both feel they have to take sides when a conflict occurs. So you have people that are definitely not going to rat out, another inmate if they're an inmate, but at the same time, are they going to come to the aid of an officer? And I've seen that where they've come to the aid of an officer who's getting beat up. And that's really a huge risk for them to take. So we have reciprocity. So when an officer becomes dependent on an inmate, what happens? Do they turn a blind eye to things? How much do they allow for favoritism? Are they going to let them go out and work on the road details? What are they going to do? How are they going to give them? You get to work in the gym today. That's where we're going to let you work, or you get to work in the kitchen. We're going to give you special details. The other thing is we also have to look at male officers and female officers working within people that can become sexually compromised. And this happened many years ago, but not that many years ago in Hampden County, where we had officers having sex with inmates for favors. So, all you need is one bad apple to make everybody look bad. We all know that. In every profession, one bad priest, one bad police officer, one bad correction officer, and they make everybody look bad, and everybody looks at that person as being the majority, and it's not. So they also can become involved with them outside of work. If they find out somebody's in there when they get out of work and they're a great plumber, and all of a sudden, hey, can you do some work in my house? And then they're back in again. You can be friendly with inmates, but you can never trust them. That is the common ground that most officers believe with. And you learn to live with this inconsistency that you can't trust them. So, well, let's talk about the use of force. Can they use force in prison? They absolutely can. But they can't do tune-ups. You know what a Tucker telephone is? That's the electrical where they shock you. They, use that. And Hudson versus McMillan said, "Oh no, you do not get to use excessive force anymore." And that was really important to come about in the 80s, that you don't get to beat up your prisoners. You don't get to tune them up. You don't get to give them electrical shock. There's a lot of things that were used back then, and they're no longer allowed to be used, and that's really important. I think that jail officers, and you're going to get this on there, have a much harder time than people in prison because they don't get to build that bond with the inmates or get to know more about the inmates because it's such a transient population in the jail. They're in and out on a continual basis. When offenders come in, some of them can be intoxicated, some of them can be coming off drugs, some of them can be suffering mental illness, whether diagnosed or undiagnosed. Some can be suicidal. And then, visitations is more frequent when you're in the jail versus when you become in prison. And the problem with visitations now is that because of COVID, there's lack of visitations. So it's a much different. Jail is much more chaotic than prison. So how do you maintain morality in prison? Okay, so correctional officers are no different than police officers when it comes to having hypertension, alcoholism, and divorce. Very high incidence of this. How do you keep somebody's moral and ethical code high? How do you make somebody be ethical? When we figure that one out, we're all going to be good. A good officer always has consistency, fairness, and flexibility. But isn't a good person the same thing? They're always consistent, fair, and flexible. And that's a really important thing to remember. They are people. They are people, and sometimes it's hard to do that. I can tell you today, I wasn't on my game this morning, and I was like very short with people. And I was like, what is going on with me? And you know what? I just had to go take a breather and step away. We're not always consistent. We're not always fair. And we're not always flexible because we're humans. But this is expected of officers. Um, I think the professional goal of all treatment specialties is to help the client, but I think that this is across the board anywhere. You see a lot more halfway houses out there. Why do we have more halfway houses out there? Well, we have more halfway houses out there because they're cheaper, but they also work well too. They help people get back into society. So we have to look and say, what is our real goal to get somebody out of here? Our real goal is to make them a better person. That's what it comes down to. We want to make them a better person. Community corrections, we've talked about it. It's positive, it's helpful, it's people working together, it's probation, parole, police, the entire society working together to get somebody to be a better member of society, to rehabilitate into society. So I know that I'm getting close to the end of this. If you have any questions or concerns, call me. I can always help you. I hope this helps you. I hope that PowerPoints help you as well. All right, I really hope they do. I want you to look at the 3-strike rules in California as well, and tell me what you think about that. Do you think that's a fair and just? Because it's been upheld in the court, but it's like, the 3rd strike can be a minor offense, and you could be in jail for 25 years. It's an interesting concept they did there. So, all right, I wish you all the best of luck. Let me know if you need any help. Talk to you later. Bye bye.